Welcome back, and I'm gonna make this an art talk, maybe a hybrid with history of propaganda. But I opened my textbook here. This one, it's the 7th edition, as previously noted. Okay, it might as well be a Bible. The volumes are writing in this, and open it up to the 20th century between the two world wars. So it's chapter 20, and I'm looking at Orozco, Riviera, and Siqueiros. So everyone knows Frida Kahlo, and Frida was married to Diego Rivera. So there's no story of Frida without Diego. Let's be clear about that. Now, if you look at Diego's history, before I get into this, let's go to the Wikipedia and get you a bit of a bios. Biacondias. Okay, so he has his own website, Diego Rivera. Let's go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's a slip of the tongue. Dramatica. That's another relic of the past on the internet that's not there anymore. That should be. It really should be. Okay. So Diego Rivera, in full, Diego Maria Concepcion Juan Nepomuceno Estanislao de Rivera y Barrientos Acosta y Rodriguez. Born December 8th, 1886, Guanajuato, Mexico. Died November 25th, 1957. Mexico City, Mexican painter whose bold, large-scale murals stimulated a revival of fresco painting in Latin America. Government scholarship enabled Rivera to study art at the Academy of San Carlos in Mexico City from age 10. So, age 10. The guy was a prodigy. And a grant from the governor of Veracruz enabled him to continue his studies in Europe in 1907. A bit much there. He studied in Spain, and in 1909 settled in Paris, where he became a friend of Picasso, Georges Braque, Georges Braque, and other leading modern painters. About 1917, he abandoned the Cubist style in his own work and moved closer to the post-impressionism of Paul Cézanne. Okay, so if you don't know Cézanne, let's find him in here. Go back a little bit further. There's Picasso. 20th century and beyond. It's indigenous arts from Africa and stuff like that. 1900, 1919. Obviously, this isn't a complete history. There's it's almost impossible to put everything into one book. There's Rembrandt. There we go. 700. 701. Impressionism, post-impressionism. It's Monet, Renoir, Monet. Let's see if it's even in here. There's Manet. Manet is actually one of my favorites. And the thing that I remember the most from Manet, see the bartender there, right, is that there was a cultural thing so that the black bands, say, it's very similar to Olympia. There we go, there's Olympia. The next page over, see, that's Olympia. Right, and so the black choker is a signifier of a prostitute. And Degas, there's paintings of the of women and young girls. See that? Okay, so he's going to be in the later part of this. There's Van Gogh. Okay, Gauguin, Van Gogh, that's good. I don't like Gauguin. Gauguin he's a creepy dude, honestly. I'm getting fed up here. I should really have bookmarks for all this stuff. So Cézanne. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Post-impressionism. Let's see, well, what time did they really frame that? (1890, 1920). Okay. We'll just Art Nouveau, new architecture. That's 1880. That's more Art Nouveau and Post-Impressionism, more in line with each other. Well, there's Cézanne. There we go. Finally. All right. You know, it just goes to show if you keep trying, you'll find the information that you want and that you so desire. You know, so this is Cézanne. Both of those are his. And again, I have volumes. The single volumes are about this yay big. They were a series of books my mother gave to me. Okay. Cézanne to Emily Bernard. Okay, so just to give some context to Diego here, because It's important. It's important to know the history and the influences of each of these artists, especially if they become propaganda artists like Diego did, like a muralist, because he did a lot. It was a lot of public work. Okay, so Cézanne. The same post-industrial revolution nostalgia for country life inspired much 19th century art. Impressionism, above all, and it is profoundly informed that of the greatest late 19th century artist, Paul Cézanne. Cézanne, however, was to go far beyond Monet and Renoir's celebration of the sunlit natural world. No painters understood so well the limitations and inner contradiction of Impressionism. One must reflect. He is recorded as saying, "The eye is not enough. Reflection is needed." His paintings are the result of prolonged meditation in front of nature, not in the instantaneous recording of its fleeting effects. He wanted to make something solid and enduring out of Impressionism, which seemed to him to lack simplicity, grandeur, and especially that sense of underlying structural unity that can transform into a whole even the most fragmentary view. Art is harmony parallel to nature, he wrote in the often quoted phrase. The problem on how to adapt the discoveries of Impressionism to this end, how to remain faithful to the truth of visual sensations without sacrificing all sense of order, how to regain form and solidarity with without losing the brilliance of Impressionist color. Indeed, how to regain it by color alone, and in addition, reconcile the flat surface of the canvas with the illusion of depth. For Cézanne had to a unique degree the faculty of seeing both depth and pattern at the same time. He felt that a picture should exist as a flat design before it creates a three-dimensional illusion. So basically, it has to have an outline, it has to have a form, and then using depth, using color for depth. To young artists around the turn of the century, when his work was first becoming known, the magnitude and loneliness of his quest seemed heroic. Because, just like any other creative person, it's a very solitary life most of the time, unless you actually make it a priority. Because there's so few people that actually understand you. There's so few. Okay. So Cézanne had exhibited with the Impressionists in 1873 and 1877, but left Paris after a few years and returned to his hometown, Aix-en-Provence, where his father was a prosperous banker. I wish my dad was a prosperous banker. Instead, he was an insurance agent and a financial planner. There he dedicated himself to his art in isolation and solitude. Of independent means, he had no need to find buyers for his paintings and was almost completely forgotten and unknown until 1895, when his first one-man show was held in Paris at the instigation of Camille Pissarro, with whom Cézanne had worked many years earlier. Therefore, his work gradually won recognition through widespread knowledge of it, even among avant-garde artists and collectors, came only with a memorial exhibition of 56 paintings at the 1907 Salon. From the first, Cézanne was attracted by still life. He could set it up in the studio and keep it almost indefinitely for contemplation. Apples and other long-standing fruits being favorites, though they sometimes had to be replaced by wax replicas before he finished painting them. Okay. I'm going to read this thing to Emily Bernard. So who was Emily Bernard? She was a French post-impressionist painter. She was friends with, well, she was also a writer. Friends with Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Eugene Bach. And later Cézanne. Me called him a woman. I thought it was a woman. Oh, goodness. I get that mistake sometimes too, obviously my name being Noel or Noel, whatever. Most of his notable work was accomplished at a young age. In the early years, 1886 through 1897. He's also associated with Classicism and Synthetism, two late 19th century art movements. Last known is his literary work composing plays, poetry, and art criticism, as well as art historical statements that contain first-hand information on the crucial period of modern art to which Bernard had contributed. History repeats itself. So sources and documents. Again, this is all very important, when it comes to interpreting the data. You have to go to first-hand accounts, say like a witness, or to the actual evidence. So a letter, correspondence through text messages now, or financial records. That's another good one. That's a language in itself. So say if you're like a forensic accountant and you're trying to find something. So the difficulty he had in expressing himself in words recalls the struggle to realize in paintings, and they convey not without pathos the single-minded sincerity with which he met his daily self-imposed challenge. The painter and critic Émile Bernard had been a prominent member of Gauguin's symbolist circle at Point-Aven in the 80s, so 1880s, and the 90s, so 1890s, when he first saw Cézanne's paintings. He wrote a brief biography of him in 1891, but they did not meet until 1904, when Bernard went to A. Their subsequent correspondence is the most important source for Cézanne's thoughts about art, and the nearest he ever came to composing a coherent body of theoretical writing. On 15th April 1904, he wrote to Bernard his now famous words, which should not, of course, be understood literally as a prescription to reduce everything to simple geometry. So it's very figurative. You got to remember that in this time, right? If you came to prominence by single means, that was the only thing that you would ever be known for. It's very hard to break through something else, especially if you didn't have some sort of social network, as we do now. I got some lion's mane in here. I don't like the powder so much. It was cheaper than a tincture. The tincture was out of stock. Oh well. Anyways, so what Cézanne is saying here. Treat nature by this cylinder, so by its form, the sphere, the cone, everything in proper perspective, so that each side of an object or a plane is directed towards a central point, so it's focused. Lines parallel to the horizon give breadth. So he's talking about perspective lines. that is a section of nature, or if you prefer, of the spectacle, that is pater omnipotens aeterna deus, spreads out before our eyes. Lines perpendicular to this horizon give depth. So the horizon, so say on this one here, right there, that's where the shoreline is. But nature for us men is more depth than surface, whence the need of introducing into our light vibrations represented by reds and yellows a sufficient amount of blue to give the impression of air. So what he was mixing on the canvas. Is these dabs, that. And then he has card players. Again, his work is, again, post-impressionism is rough, right? It's not clear. It's not concise. It's about the feeling and the impression, right? What's my first feeling about this? All right, and so now we'll go back to Riviera and Calho. So everybody knows about Calho. I'm not gonna do anything about her. It's just, if I'm gonna say any comment, it's that when women don't have children, they go friggin' crazy, right? Just get really aggressive. But Calho went through a lot of physical challenges, and that's why she was an artist. It was the only thing that she could do. Yeah. All right. Anyways, so through politics, though politics have influenced the visual arts through history in many and different ways, most notably under the ancient Roman Empire during the revolutionary and counter-revolutionary years of the 19th century, they have seldom played so prominent a role as they did in the 1920s and 1930s. Relations between communism and the arts were so close. Because again, it was used as propaganda, right? The technology and the means by which the message is communicated. All right. So, though they both followed a zigzag course both through Russia and in Western Europe, fascism and Nazism were also actively concerned with the arts as propaganda, and the period closed with one of Picasso's major works in which he was only explicitly political. Picasso's major works, which is also his only explicitly political painting. So that's probably Guernica. However, it was in Mexico, and the relationship between politics and art during these years was most fruitful, partly because the Mexican artists themselves formulated much of the theoretical base on which the program for a new public art was erected, and partially because it was combined with the quest to rediscover their national identity. So you're talking about national identity, and I'm staring at this thing from the canvas that was uploaded 2 years ago, and it's entitled Canada's Dark History, Kent Monkman and the RCMP. Now, I'm very angry at Kent Monkman. I am, for a good reason. Right. By this, hey, Floppy. Hey. What's up? Just saying hello? Okay. By the time Riviera painted the making of a fresco showing the building of a city, The revolutionary fervor of his early years had relaxed, but it continued to inform all his work, and it is in this context that his paintings had also those of his sometimes companion Jose Clementine or Zoco and David Alfaro Siqueiros should be seen. Mexico had been thrown off Spanish colonial rule in 1821 and therefore followed a turbulent century marked by the loss in 1848 of New Mexico, Texas, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming to the United States. 20 years later, Napoleon III made his disastrous attempt to take over the country and install the Archduke Maximilian as emperor. By 1910, when the Mexican Revolution began, 90% of the peasants had been dispossessed of their land and were forced to live under I don't know how to pronounce that. Inquisitus system of debt peonage to their oppressive landlords. So that's debt slavery. Not all of whom were Mexicans. History repeats itself. A decade of civil war ended in 1920 with the election of Alvaro Obregón as president of the installation of a revolutionary nationalist rather than a full-scale communist or socialist regime. It was immediately and actively promoted as an ambitious cultural program for which Siqueiros, whose most remarkable works were painted much later, drew from a formal declaration of social, political, and aesthetic principles in 1922, from which the following extract is taken. Now, before I do this, I'm going to find this the Picasso book. Okay, it's in the other one. Picasso, where are you now? Picasso. There it is. I really need a bookshelf. See this here? I imagine that this is a very rare text. Considering it's I have paint on it too. That's hilarious. A Museo Ideal de Picasso, la collection que nunca existo, Juan J. Luna. So you see, this is a very nice book. A very nice book. I haven't really opened it much. So this was published in 2006 from Barcelona. Guernica, so 160. There you go. So this text is very nice. It's in Spanish and English. And this is Guernica. And they gave it, it's a big painting, it's a huge painting. So that's Guernica. Okay, so this canvas, conceived as an expressive grandiloquent mural, was commissioned in 1937 by the Republican government of Spain for the Spanish pavilion at the Exposition Internationale des Arts et Techniques dans la vie moderne, the spectacular cultural manifestation, otherwise known as the 1937 Paris World Exhibition. When Picasso was about to set to work on his huge composition, which it seems was originally conceived as a monumental rendering of the so typically Spanish bullfight, he heard the appalling news of the bombing of a Basque town in full daylight, its streets crowded with people who had come from many places in the surrounding region to the market held there that day. Having encountered the theme that boiled inside him and driven by a storm of passions aroused by such a criminal act, he executed his preliminary sketches and 10 days later began to work on the painting itself. Here we observe a mixture of immediate consequences of the war in a number of different references. Some take from his recent Minotaur Maquera series. Thus, between May 1st and June 4th of that year, he completed the enormous canvas, spurred on by his boundless energy, a frenzy of rage, and unbridled vehemence, the fruit of genuine fury tinged with importance and the need to demand that justice be done. The act perpetrated under the cover of darkness artificially illuminated the numerous beings brought together in the painting, both human and animal, men, women, children, horses, bulls, and the harrowing expressiveness of each one have become symbols of reactions to warlike acts and mythological signs of the deep suffering caused by ruthless brutality. Now, I'm trying to remember, there's something about the Spanish Civil War that Picasso did. Massacre in Korea, 1951. That's a bit farther than what I was looking for. But it's about conflict. This is is a very interesting painting this year. I'll read from it. And this is why these I'm pulling these together because of Picasso and Riviera. Bark. I don't have anything about Bark. So I'm looking at Diego's stuff right here, especially the agitator, and next to say this massacre in Korea or Guernica. Like other celebrated works by the master, like Guernica or the Ossuary. Now, this present creation is fruit of his reactions to the process of degeneration the human being undergoes in limit situations, above all those caused by armed conflicts, which foster savagely heartless forms of behavior. This particular canvas derives from an item of news that Picasso heard relating to the massacre of a group of native civilians during military operations in the Korean War. So 50 to 53. The background landscape, with its meager spattering of ruins, accentuates the effect of desolation and suggests a dramatic setting, a perfect framework by virtue of its tragic devastation, for the horrible crime being committed in the foreground. The canvas is clearly influenced by famous paintings of Goya and Manet, which respectively narrate events during the Spanish War of Independence. And the European campaign conducted in Mexico in support of Emperor Maximilian of Habsburg In this bleak, characteristically Picassoan painting of exact date of execution, January 18th, 1951, the Malagueno portrays the defenselessness in contemporary registers against barbarism, its tragic immediacy acting as a warning to everyone. So, you know, if I'm gonna draw to myself, you know, and the history of propaganda, and now these art talks, like this is a warning, right? These videos are a warning, and not just a warning, but, you know, a call to action to actually do something about our history and the facing erasure by you know, the powers that be, whomever they are, because it doesn't matter who's in power, whatever their motivations are, they get replaced eventually by someone that's even worse, or, you know, only marginally better. You know, the domination of mediocrity. California studio, the Metis. You know, I find it interesting that you know, Picasso liked to work in black and white and gray frequently. And the déjeuner sur the Arab after many. It's you know, again, these it takes a lot to put this all together. So, open and shut case, honestly. And, you know, again, this is some of this has to do, if I'm gonna, you know, continue on with this, because they mentioned it with Riviera here and Calho, you know, them obviously being communists, right? That's their motivation, and by any means necessary, honestly. You know, because it's you know, Diego, he celebrates in this, you know, the industry and symbolism. You know, because Diego is about the struggle of existence. It says here, right? Let's see. You know, obviously, you know, he's a rebel. He was always a rebel. I really like this image here, where you have, okay, Jose Clement Orozco, American Civilization. Yeah, American Civilization here. And you notice the military man going after, say, the Minuteman or the Revolutionary with a knife to stab in his back. Excusez-moi. Okay, so here it goes on. Insufferable. Like I said, even in this time, they're talking about talking about privilege and so on and so forth. But, you know, everyone's life has struggles, just different in different capacities. You have to, you know, not all rich people are bad people. You know, not all those who who can't have come into wealth and to money are, savage or evil, so to speak. Or, what about the self-made people? That's what I want to ask about, right? What about them? I'll read a bit of context here. In contrast to Riviera's work in the USA, that of Orozco had become more rather than less outspoken, notably in the murals he painted for the Barker Library of Dartmouth College in Hanover, Massachusetts in 1932. Orozco was in no way inhibited by the fact that Dartmouth College had become a prestigious East Coast bastion of white Anglo-Saxon privilege, despite having been founded specifically to provide education for Native Americans. Indeed, the college's equivocal past set the theme, that of a continent characterized by the dualities of its conflicting Indigenous and European historical experiences. Orozco's conception of the American idea centered on the myth of Quetzalcoatl, and was represented on the two main walls of the library with murals of America's pre-Columbian civilization confronted with post-Cortez America. The final panels in the series show, firstly, a chilly world of Puritan conformity, with white school children standing obediently around their straight-laced woman teacher. In contrast, Hispanic or Latin American is represented by a tragic but also potentially heroic world in which the rebel Emiliano Zapata stands as the only upright figure amongst corrupt politicians and generals. So that's the painting I just showed you. So there's it's cultural conflict. That's what that is. That's what it's really about. Because if I'm gonna refer to Monkman here, and as to previous videos, there was tribes within Canada that cooperated and were welcoming, and then there was ones that were not, right? And they inspired rebellions. Coming from a different perspective, obviously someone's gonna come at me. Oh, you're a cisgendered white man. You come from privilege, and he's like, you have no idea about my struggles. Absolutely none. And so, again, this is these parallels. Okay, Monkman's very outspoken, but the imagery is disgusting. It's disgusting. He might be happy about that. He might watch this video and say, "Oh, at least you felt something, you straight white man." Okay, so then towards the end there, this is obviously skipping. Why did Riviera accept these commissions from the hated capitalists? He had just returned from a slightly stormy year in the Soviet Union as a guest of the communist government. Meanwhile, the grim years of the Depression had begun in the United States. Perhaps he hoped to spread the light of social and political awareness, if not the communist gospel itself. Mural painting must help in the man's struggle to become a human being, he wrote. And for that purpose, it must live wherever it can. No place is too bad for it, so long as it is permitted to fulfill its primary functions of nutrition and enlightenment. It was this optimistic spirit that he carried out a commission from the San Francisco Art Association, although it was stipulated that he had not to paint anything of a political nature. The strength of his public art is seen as the most serene and the mature work. Though strictly secular and materialist, it had a solemn, quietly confident, almost sacramental gravity and monumentality. His Cubist apprenticeship and his admiration of Italian Renaissance fresco painting had left him with a love of mathematical construction and what he called the secret geometry, which found fulfillment here. The device of a builder's scaffolding spread across the composition is skillfully used to frame the five scenes. Riviera himself is in the center, seen from behind with his assistants. Below, the factory managers stand at the feet of a giant worker towering above them in his overalls with the benign, imperturbable presence of some great Buddha figure. Other workers, including designers, are shown to the right and left. It calmly celebrates the aspect of the American dream that Riviera had allowed himself to glimpse before the confrontation with John D. Rockefeller brought his American honeymoon to an end. So I'm going to close that. And I'm going to tear Monkman a new asshole. He's the one that's privileged at this point. Let that be clear. Now, when I first saw Monkman, I was like, this is interesting. But then as time goes on, the more aggressive and insulting he becomes of different historical figures. And then this has to do with revolution and how you're trying to install a communist state, right? Hence why he's been used and propped up to his position, right? If we're going to get topical in this moment, by the communist liberal government in Canada. Okay, so I'm going to let this play the canvas.
The Fathers of Confederation. In 2016, Toronto-based Indigenous artist Kent Monkman painted the scene with one slight adjustment. He added a portrait of his gender-fluid and time-traveling alter ego, Miss Chief Eagle Testicle. Miss Chief is nude, subversively and defiantly posing in the middle of the room, under the uncomfortable stares of the various fathers. Monkman's Daddies depicts a powerful national symbol, the founding fathers of Canada in the process of building a country. But he doesn't paint this symbol to venerate it or to celebrate it, he does it to question it. When we're looking at this painting, we're forced to think, why are none of the fathers Indigenous? The fathers are seemingly uncomfortable at the sight of Miss Chief Eagle Testicle, and this discomfort might not be because Miss Chief is gender fluid or because she's nude. I'm willing to bet that the fathers are uncomfortable because Miss Chief is Indigenous. Monkman's work sheds light on Canada's horrible, genocidal, and colonial history. Reclaiming the historical and artistic space robbed from Indigenous peoples during the past centuries is no easy task. In 2017, for the 150th anniversary of Canada, Monkman presented Shame and Prejudice, a story of resilience. Through this project, you revisit Canada's colonial history, a history that obviously isn't celebrated nor remembered. It's the kind of shameful history that a nation would rather keep secret and forget about. It's the kind of history that invalidates the slogan, "The world needs more Canada." Monkman, through incredible narrative compositions, reminds us that Canada has a long, dark, and oppressive relationship with the First Nations, and that this relationship is not only past, but also painfully present. There is so much to go through if we want to look at the different ways Canada has historically oppressed Indigenous peoples. It's not only an extremely complex issue, but it's an issue that runs through the very roots of the Canadian nation. For that reason, I decided for this video to only focus on one single Canadian institution. It's only one of the dozens of facets to this problem. So, the one thing that caught my attention while going through Monkman's work was the representation of the RCMP, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the Mountie. To learn more about it, I contacted Dr. Steve Hewitt, senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham, who specialized in the history of the RCMP, and here's what he had to say about the perception of the Mountie.
Often when you think of the Mountie, the Mountie or the Mounties, you see them in popular culture. So, for instance, they frequently appeared in episodes of The Simpsons. You've seen them in Hollywood films. And they're often sort of benign, almost friendly characters. And again, depending on what part of Canadian society you're from, so if you grew up like me as a white person, as someone of sort of European heritage, you might see the Mounties as this sort of friendly institution that's there to protect you. But again, change perspectives, think in terms of Indigenous peoples, their historic interaction, and it's a very different history. And I think if you're living outside of Canada, it's very easy to see this symbol as just a symbol, but there's actually substance to that symbol. This is not simply a national symbol. This is a police force, and this is a police force that for over a century has helped to control the lives of Indigenous peoples, and that was true in the 19th century, it was true in the 20th century, and it's true still in the 21st century.
And the RCMP as an institution in charge of controlling the lives of Indigenous peoples is heavily depicted in Monkman's work. In The Subjugation of Truth, you see Chief Poundmaker and Chief Big Bear, Cree chiefs from the 19th century who were both criminalized for standing up to colonial forces. They are chained, stone-faced, and strong as they are being lectured by white settlers. Miss Chief Evil Testicle, dressed as Queen Victoria, watches over the scene. On the left, you see Sir John A. Macdonald, not only one of the founding fathers of Canada, but also one of the founding fathers of the RCMP. He's looking proudly and approvingly at a Mountie. The Mountie, though only halfway through the frame, is extremely important in this composition. He is the bridge between the chiefs and the settlers. The chained men aren't listening to the colonizers. These colonizers have told them nothing but lies, hence the title of this painting. The only thing that is linking the Cree chiefs and the settlers isn't words, compromise, or an alliance. The one thing that is linking them is force that can only be carried out by the man in red, the Mountie. The hand on Poundmaker's shoulder is the perfect symbol for this paternalistic use of force and illustrates the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. The most shocking and poignant representations of the RCMP are in Monkman's paintings depicting Canada's residential schools, or more specifically, the moment when Indigenous kids were forcibly taken from their homes to be educated or re-educated by the Canadian government and the clergy. In Monkman's The Scream, you see this extremely violent operation led by both the RCMP and the clergy. The composition evokes so much force and movement. It seems like there's so much being pulled and torn from a child's limbs to a woman's clothes. This illustrates the rupture between the children and their homes, all of it enforced by the RCMP. The goal behind these residential schools was to assimilate Indigenous children, to make them good little Europeans, or, as it was famously put, to kill the Indian in the child. This violent analogy became at times too literal. As many as 30,000 residential school children were either found dead or went missing. To learn more about the situation, I spoke to award-winning human rights journalist Brandy Morin. Being Cree and Iroquois herself, she has written many articles on the subject of human rights violations against Indigenous peoples in Canada, and she also hosts a fantastic podcast titled Indigenous News and Views, which I strongly recommend. I will link it in the description. Here's what she had to say about the residential schools.
The residential school legacy began in the late 1800s here in Canada after the government issued the Indian Act into legislation. So this was, not too long after this country was confederated. And residential schools were put in place to assimilate Indigenous children into the mainstream culture and remove them from their homes, from their families, from their cultures, and strip away their identities and their language. So there were hundreds of these schools built across Canada, and they operated until 1996. So for well over 100 years in this country. And kids were taken at 5 years old until 16 years old and forcibly removed from their parents. And their parents couldn't see them for most of the year. If they were lucky, they could go home in the summertime.
This is 24 minutes long, so obviously I'm not going to watch the whole thing. But if I'm going to say one statement, it's an easy one. There's no such thing as a noble savage, right? That concept from the European perspective, because cultural differences. And the one that I'm going to bring up, and the one example I'll bring up will be the Battle of Saskatchewan. So the Battle of Fish Creek, and I obviously cited this in another video. Okay, so this has some context as well, and looking at this again. Fought April 24th, 1885 at Fish Creek, Saskatchewan, was a major Métis victory over the Canadian forces attempting to quell Louis Riel's Northwest Rebellion. So Louis Riel, if you didn't know it, is a Canadian politician, a founder of the province of Manitoba, and a political leader of the Métis people. So who are the Métis? Métis people in Canada are specific cultural communities who trace their descendants to First Nations and European settlers. So they were mixed. They're mixed, right? Let that be clear, that Métis people are half English, half European, half French, German, whatever, and half Native. Okay, Métis peoples are recognized as one of Canada's Indigenous peoples under the Constitution Act of 1982, along with First Nations and Inuit. In April 8th, 2014, the Supreme Court of Canada, Daniels versus Canada appeal held that Métis and non-status Indians are Indians under Section 91, subsection 24, but excluded the Paoli test as the only criterion to determine Métis identity. So the Paoli test R versus Paoli, commonly called the Paoli ruling. So this gets into the law and so forth, the decisions. Because again, you can't examine propaganda without the cultural context and without the arts, right? And then also the legal decisions, because every precedent is then enacted into force, right? Enforced by, say, the RCMP or a police force, right? So Sault Ste. Marie, father and son, Steve and Roddy Powley, were charged in 1993 with possession of a moose that they had shot out of season and without a license. The pair pleaded not guilty on the grounds that, as métier, they had their Aboriginal right to hunt that was not subject to the Ontario game laws. Okay, so it comes down to power, right? And there's a reason, some people will be like, okay, well, the natives, our ancestors, they didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand property rights and so on and so forth, and they didn't have the correct education or whatnot. But that's insulting to the people of the past, right? And as is with the trends, our people in general around the world have become more or less and less intelligent with the advent of technology and the constant bombardment of the propaganda, right? That for which puts you into this programmed box, right, of re-education. So it doesn't matter how it happens. What matters is that it does. And so if you forget, if you examine Canadian history from only one side, right, and you don't include the other, where it's only about the residential schools and it's only about the victimhood mentality of the natives. And I speak of this, with some, maybe a finger's worth of Micmac in me, but this is why I get angry. Is because there's a lot of Canada that is white skin, okay? It has native heritage. It's not traced. And as I said before, there's tribes, and we're talking about tribalism, as I have before in another installment with this about Africa and how tribes fight each other all the time, frequently. Like history is consistently a story of conflict and of love. One or the other, love and hate, love-hate propaganda that George Stroumboulopoulos. Freaking Greeks. Anyways, so while the Métis were initially developed as the mixed race descendants of early unions between First Nations and colonial era Europe settlers, Indigenous women and male French settlers, which generations, particularly in central and western Canada, a distinct métier culture developed. The women of the unions in eastern Canada were usually Algonquin and Ojibwe, and in western Canada they were Saulteaux, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, or of a mixed descendant from these peoples. Their union with European men engaged in fur trade with the Old Northwest were often the type known as marriage à la façon du pays. After New France was ceded to Great Britain's control in 1763, there is an important distinction between French métier, born of francophone voyageur father, and Anglo métier, known as country-born or mixed bloods. For instance, in the 1870 census of Manitoba, descendants from English or Scottish fathers. Today, these two cultures have essentially coalesced into location-specific métier traditions. This does not preclude a range of other métier cultural expressions across North America. Such polyethnic people were historically referred to by other terms, many of which are now considered to be offensive, such as mixed bloods, half-breeds, bois-brouage, Bungi, Black Scots, and Jacquetars. The later terms having meaning in a Newfoundland context. So Black Scots would be from Nova Scotia, and they're again another finger in my heritage. So like this is the problem when we consider what he's saying, right, is just that it's always a fight, you know, and there's two sides. Like, okay, so perhaps the children died of malnutrition. Not to doubt, because obviously I'm going to go from as inept as I am in this area of history. You know, there's disease, there's famine, there's inadequate housing, and so on and so forth. That was interesting as a text, you know, and misunderstandings. You know, we're going to talk about the dirty dozen as to, or a chain of events, the links that happen between the first occurrence and then the actual death of someone, right? There's a lot of gaps to be filled there, and that's where people insert their inherent biases to sway an argument from you know, not being beneficial to being beneficial to themselves. And by use of propaganda, and again, this constant slap of the face, every fucking time, you know, and this is why I get angry with the Every Child Matters thing. And of course, I'm like, of course, every child matters. You know, let's not be silly about that. What really matters is putting your money where your mouth is, right? And by my account, right, everywhere I've gone, and I've been, you know, I try to support through either gasoline or marijuana or eating on reserves or whatever when I'm close by, because again, this gets into specific details where there's tribes that have a lot and there's tribes that don't, right? There's tribes in Northern Ontario that have to boil their water. And then there's tribes that own casinos and they own gas bars, right? There's a complete and utter disparity between the two. And just to blame everything upon someone that is you know, that's a white man is disgusting. You know, this is why, okay, yeah, I appreciate the fact that he's a provocateur and he's trying to get people to talk about and think about Canadian history, but just, you know, it's just disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. You know, it's eye rape. It's eye rape. I don't even want to look at it. I want to punch him in the mouth. Like, get your freaking act together, man. It honestly, it actually does more damage to natives in long term reputation than it does anything else because of the imagery, right? You should not seek revenge, because when you seek revenge, you got to dig two graves, theirs and yours. Fucking propaganda.